Harry's suitcase was still rolling when the hand caught his arm. Not a fan, not a photographer, not security. He knew that grip. He'd felt it once before, 20 years ago, when he'd tried to sneak out the back door of Balmoral after one too many whiskies. The fingers were older now, but the strength hadn't changed. He turned around, and there she was, Princess Anne, standing in the middle of Heathrow Terminal 5 like she'd been waiting there for hours. Maybe she had. "You're not leaving this country," she said, "until you look me in the eye." The corridor was mostly empty. It was that strange hour between the last evening flights and the red-eyes to Los Angeles, and the only sound was the low hum of the air conditioning and the muffled boarding announcement 3 gates away. Harry's security detail took a step forward, then stopped. They knew who Anne was. Everyone did. And no one, not a single person in the history of the British royal family, had ever successfully told Princess Anne to stand down. Harry pulled his arm free, straightened his jacket, tried to look unbothered. "Anne, this isn't the place." "No," she said, cold, final. "The place was the palace. The place was a private room with your family, but you chose Netflix instead. So now we do this here." He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Because the thing about Anne is she never started a fight she hadn't already won. She arrived with evidence. She arrived with facts. She arrived with 50 years of silence as her weapon. And standing there under the fluorescent lights of Heathrow, Harry could see it in her face. She knew everything. £80 million, Harry. She didn't blink. "That's what I'm here about." His face changed. The casual front just dropped. Whatever he had expected to happen during his 20-hour trip to London, this was not it. But before we continue, make sure you hit subscribe. Drop a comment below where you're watching from. Now, back to what happened next. To understand how Princess Anne ended up standing in an airport terminal at 10:30 at night, staring down her own nephew with the kind of fury she usually reserved for incompetent horse judges, we need to go back. Not far, just 72 hours. 3 days earlier, the world was different, or at least Anne thought it was. It started with a phone call. Gatcombe Park sits in the Gloucestershire countryside like it's been holding its breath for 300 years. It's not flashy. It's not Buckingham Palace or Kensington or any of the places the cameras love. It's a working estate, with mud on the boots by the door and fields that go on forever. Anne liked it that way. She'd lived most of her life avoiding the spotlight, doing her job, showing up to every engagement, every ribbon cutting, every hospital visit, without ever once sitting down for a television interview to talk about how hard it all was. That wasn't her style. It wasn't how she was raised. And at 74 years old, she had no intention of starting now. That Tuesday evening, she was in her study, briefing papers on one side of the desk, a cup of tea gone cold on the other. She always forgot about the tea. One of her dogs, a bull terrier named Jem, was curled up near the radiator. Then her phone rang. Not her personal mobile, the landline, the one that only rang when something official was happening, or when someone inside the family needed to speak without leaving a digital trace. She picked up on the second ring. Anne, it was William. And from that single word, just her name, she knew something was wrong. William didn't call her on this line for small talk. William didn't call anyone for small talk. He was like his grandmother that way. Every word had a purpose. "What is it?" There was a pause. She could hear him breathing. She could hear, faintly, the sound of a child somewhere in the background. Louis, probably. He was always the loudest. And then a door closing. William had stepped into another room. "I need you to sit down," he said. "I am sitting down." Another pause. Longer this time. The Netflix deal. Harry's Netflix deal. We've seen the full contract. Anne set her pen down slowly. How much of it? All of it. Every page, every clause, every line item. His voice was steady, but she could hear what was underneath. William was barely holding it together. Anne, it's worse than we thought. It's worse than anyone thought. Tell me. And he did. What William had received, through channels that remain private to this day, was not the edited summary that had leaked to the newspapers months ago. That version had been carefully managed, stripped of anything truly damaging, presented to the public as a creative partnership between a prince and a streaming platform. Inspiring stories, documentaries about social issues, mental health, the kind of language that sounds noble in a press release and means nothing when you read the fine print. This was the fine print, a full, unredacted production agreement between Prince Harry, Meghan, and a major Netflix subsidiary. 47 pages. Legal language so dense it took a trained eye to understand what was really being agreed to. And the number at the bottom, the number that made William sit down when he first saw it, was £80 million. £80 million. Think about that for a second. 80 million. Not a salary, not a performance bonus. A fortune so large it stops being a number and starts being a statement. A nurse working in the National Health Service earns roughly £30,000 a year. She would need to work for over 2,600 years, 26 centuries, to earn what Harry got for a single signature on a single contract. A retired teacher living on her state pension would need closer to 4,000 years. Think about that. 4,000 years. The Roman Empire hadn't even started 4,000 years ago, and that's how long it would take an ordinary person to earn what Harry received for sitting in a room in California and saying yes. And Princess Anne, the hardest working member of the royal family, the woman who regularly completes over 500 engagements a year, more than any other royal, more than the king himself, receives an allowance from the sovereign grant that doesn't come anywhere close. She has served the crown for over half a century. She has visited every corner of this country, shaken more hands than anyone could possibly count, stood in the rain and the cold and the heat without complaint. And the total she has earned across all those decades of service is a fraction of what Harry got for one contract. £80 million. For what, exactly? That's the question William asked Anne on the phone that night, and as she listened, leaning forward in her chair with the briefing papers forgotten, and Jem looking up from the radiator as if she could feel the shift in the room, the answer became clear. It wasn't just for a documentary about life in Montecito. It wasn't just for a series about mental health or charity work, or any of the projects that had been announced with great fanfare and vague promises. The contract laid out, in specific legal terms, exactly what Harry and Meghan had agreed to provide, and it was devastating. Private family conversations, real discussions, not imagined, not dramatized from rumour, but actual exchanges that had taken place behind closed doors at Sandringham, at Balmoral, at Buckingham Palace, at Kensington. Conversations about the children. Who said what at Christmas dinner? Who argued? Who cried? Who walked out of which room and slammed which door? Conversations about Diana. And not the version the public knows, the private mother, the woman who tucked her boys in at night and whispered things to them that were never meant for anyone else's ears. But that wasn't the worst of it. Page 12 of the contract contained a clause that made Anne read it 3 times to make sure she wasn't mistaken. It granted the production company the right to dramatize private interpersonal exchanges within the royal household for narrative purposes. In plain English, that meant they could take real conversations, things actually said by real people behind real doors, and recreate them on camera. Actors playing Charles, actors playing William, actors playing Kate, actors playing Anne herself, speaking words that were supposed to be private, performing moments that were supposed to be sacred. and beaming them into living rooms around the world as entertainment. Page 23 was worse. It outlined what the contract called archival personal narratives, detailed first-person accounts from Harry's childhood, from Diana's years, from the darkest period of the family's history. The kind of stories you tell your brother at 3 in the morning when you can't sleep, and the weight of who you are and what you've lost is crushing you. The kind of stories that exist in that sacred space between grief and trust, between a son and the memory of his mother. Harry had typed them up, or dictated them, or sat across from a producer in a bright California office and let them record every word while someone took notes on a laptop and a camera hummed in the corner. William's voice on the phone had gone very quiet. He'd moved past anger. He was somewhere on the other side of it now, in that cold, still place where you realize the damage is already done, and the only question left is how far it reaches. Kate found it first, he said. She was looking at promotional material online. One of the production company's internal pages had been briefly accessible, someone's mistake, probably, and she saw a still image, a recreation of Charlotte's birthday party, the cake, the decorations, the exact dress Charlotte wore, the colour of the napkins, everything accurate, everything taken from a private family moment that Kate had mentioned to Harry in a conversation she thought was just family. Anne didn't say anything for a long moment. She just held the phone and stared at the contract pages spread across her desk. "And he signed this," Anne said. She wasn't asking. "His signature is on every page." But there was more. Page 27 detailed something the contract referred to as emotional conflict arcs. In plain English, that meant the arguments, the fallouts, the moments when Charles raised his voice, or William walked out of a room, or Kate sat in a hallway trying not to cry because the pressure of royal life was pressing down on her chest, and she needed 5 minutes to breathe. Those moments, the rawest, most human, most vulnerable moments that happen inside any family, had been mapped out on a timeline and assigned to episodes. Episode 3, the argument at Sandringham. Episode 5, the confrontation about Meghan's role. Episode 7, the conversation between brothers that ended in silence. Each one had a production note beside it. Each one had a budget line. Each one had been scheduled for filming in a studio in Los Angeles, where actors would stand on a set designed to look like the inside of Buckingham Palace and speak words that were never meant to leave those walls. Anne sat back in her chair. She took off her reading glasses and placed them on the desk. She stared at the ceiling for a long time. She thought about her mother, about the Queen, who had spent 70 years on the throne and had never once, not in the darkest moment of her reign, not during the fire at Windsor Castle, not during the annus horribilis when the family seemed to be tearing itself apart in public, had never once allowed private conversations to leak, because that was the deal. You carry the weight in silence. You don't sell the silence. Then she turned to page 31. And that was the page that broke something inside Anne that she thought was unbreakable. William had warned her about it, but reading it yourself is different. The children's section. George, Charlotte, and Louis. Their actual names, written into a production schedule, between budget numbers and shooting dates, like they were categories in a filing system. Charlotte's birthday party was in there, the one where she wore the blue dress and blew out the candles with her eyes squeezed shut. George's first day at a new school. A moment when Louis said something funny at a family gathering that made even Charles laugh. Something Kate had shared in private at Christmas because she thought she was talking to family. All of it catalogued, all of it scheduled, all of it assigned a monetary value in a column next to production costs and marketing budgets. Anne stood up. The tea was cold and she didn't care. She walked to the window and looked out at the Gloucestershire night. Black fields, a sliver of moon, the distant shape of the stable roof. 50 years. She had given 50 years to the crown. She had stood in the rain at memorials. She had sat at bedsides in hospitals. She had buried friends, attended funerals, represented the country in places most people couldn't find on a map. She had done it without interviews, without memoirs, without a single appearance on an American talk show. Because the deal was simple. You serve, you stay quiet, you carry on. That was the deal your family made, and you honoured it or you didn't. Harry didn't. When does he fly back to London? She asked. William hesitated. Thursday evening, Heathrow. He's got a meeting at a charity on Friday morning. Quick photo opportunity, then straight back to California on the evening flight. Which terminal? Anne, what are you planning? Which terminal, William? 5. But Anne, should we talk about? We've talked enough. Everyone in this family has been talking for years. Talking to lawyers, talking to advisors, talking about what to do, what to say, how to handle it. Nobody has walked up to that boy and told him the truth to his face. She picked up a pen and wrote on the corner of a briefing paper, Terminal 5, Thursday. I'll handle this. Charles will do what Charles always does. He'll ask for a meeting. He'll consult his advisors. He'll spend 3 weeks thinking about it. And by then, there'll be another series in production and we'll have missed our chance. Again. Anne's voice was hard now. This family has spent years writing letters and having meetings and asking lawyers what to do. Meanwhile, Harry keeps signing contracts and cashing checks. Somebody needs to stand in front of him and say it. I'm going to be that somebody. You know he won't listen. Maybe not, but he'll hear it. There's a difference. William went quiet for a moment. Then, you're right, and I should be the one going, but no. If you go, it becomes a brother's fight. The press will turn it into a soap opera, but if I go, I'm his aunt. I'm 74 years old. I've got no agenda, no rivalry, no jealousy. I'm just a woman who read a contract and decided enough was enough. She picked up a pen and wrote on the corner of a briefing paper, Terminal 5, Thursday. Go be with your children, William. Hold them tight. Make sure they know they're safe. She hung up. The study was quiet again. Just the clock and the dog and the rustle of papers she was no longer reading. Jem looked up from the radiator, sensing something. Anne looked down at the dog and said, out loud to the empty room, 50 years, Jem, and he couldn't manage 5. The next morning, Wednesday, Anne did something she rarely did. She cancelled an engagement, a visit to a veterans' care home in Bristol. She'd been looking forward to it for weeks. She always loved talking to the old soldiers, hearing their stories, holding their hands. Was quietly rescheduled through her office. The reason given was a private family matter. No further details were provided. No further details were needed. She spent the morning at her desk, but not with the usual papers. William had sent the full contract through a secure channel overnight, and Anne had printed every page before breakfast, 47 of them, spread across the mahogany desk. She read each one with a pen in hand, underlining things, circling numbers, writing notes in the margins. She made herself another cup of tea around 10, forgot about it by 1:15. That was twice now. By the time she finished all 47 pages, it was past noon. She sat there for a while, staring at nothing. Then she picked up the phone and called Kensington Palace. Not William this time. Kate. I've read the whole thing, Anne said. Kate was quiet on the other end. She'd already done her crying. Anne could tell. The children's section, Kate asked softly. Yes. He used our children to sell a story, Anne. Kate's voice had gone flat, completely flat, like she'd used up every emotion she had, and there was nothing left but facts. He took moments I shared privately, things I told him at Christmas dinner because I thought he was family, because I thought that's what you do with family. And he handed them to strangers in an office 6,000 miles away. I know. I keep thinking about what we told the children when the first documentary came out. We told them Uncle Harry was making a program about his life. We made it sound ordinary. We said families sometimes share their stories in different ways. We were trying to protect them, Anne. We were lying to our own children because we didn't want them to know their uncle was selling their bedtime stories to strangers in a conference room. Kate paused. Anne could hear her breathing, could hear the faint sound of a child's footsteps somewhere above, probably Lewis, running from one room to another, blissfully unaware. I can't even tell Charlotte what happened. She's 9 years old. She shouldn't have to understand any of this. Kate's voice thinned. But she already does. She asked William something last week. She came into the sitting room after school, still in her uniform with her bag on one shoulder, and she stood in the doorway and said, "Daddy, why is Uncle Harry talking about us on the telly?" Just like that. Not angry, not upset, just confused. 9 years old, and she wants to understand why someone she trusted is showing strangers the things that were supposed to stay inside their home. What did William say? Nothing. He pulled her into a hug and held her there for a long time. And she let him. She didn't ask again. Kate's voice went quiet, but she knew. Children always know, Anne. You can't protect them from it forever. And that's what makes me angriest. Not the money, not the contract. The fact that my daughter is learning, at 9 years old, that people you love can betray you. That's not a lesson any child should learn from their own family. Anne sat there with the phone against her ear and the contract pages spread across her desk. 9 years old. When Anne was 9, she'd been shielded from everything. The press, the politics, the weight of the institution. It was a different era, she knew that, but the principle was exactly the same. Children are not content. Children are not storylines. Children are not budget items in a production schedule worth £80 million. "I'm going to Heathrow tomorrow night," Anne said. "I know," Kate replied. "William told me. And I'm glad it's you." Kate's voice steadied. "Because you're the only person in this family who will say what needs to be said without worrying about how it looks on the front page." Anne almost smiled at that. Almost. "I'll let you know how it goes." "Anne?" "Yes?" "Tell him what he took from us. Not just the stories. Not just the contract. Tell him what it feels like to explain to your daughter why the people she loved are being watched by strangers." "I will." Now, think about this for a moment. If someone in your family sold your private conversations, your children's stories, your mother's memory, for £80 million, what would you do? Would you stay silent? Would you make a phone call? Would you send a letter through a lawyer and wait 6 months for a reply? Or would you drive to the airport, stand in the terminal, and say it to their face? Anne chose the airport. Thursday came slowly. Anne rode in the morning. One of her horses, a big grey gelding she'd had for years, through the fields behind Gatcombe. No phone, no staff, no briefing papers. Just the sound of hooves and the cold air on her face. She rode for an hour. When she came back, her mind was clear. By 3 o'clock, she was dressed. Dark coat, old scarf, flat shoes. Nothing fancy. She wasn't making a statement. She was going to an airport to talk to her nephew. Her driver, Collins, 11 years on the job, knew better than to ask questions. Had the car ready at 4. "Heathrow," she said, sliding into the back seat. "Terminal 5. Collins nodded. He started the engine. The gravel crunched under the tyres as they pulled out of the drive and onto the lane. Rain began to spot the windshield, light at first, just a mist, then steady drops that Collins dealt with by switching the wipers to their slow setting. The rhythmic sweep of the blades was the only sound for the first 40 minutes. Anne looked out the window. Green fields, sheep, a church steeple, normal England. She wasn't thinking about the scenery. She didn't rehearse what she was going to say. She didn't need to. The contract was in her briefcase. Not all 47 pages, just page 31, the one with the children's names. That was enough. The drive from Gatcombe to Heathrow takes about 2 hours when the traffic cooperates. It didn't. The M4 was sluggish near Swindon, some kind of lane closure, roadworks that had been there for months, and almost stopped entirely near Reading. Anne didn't complain. She never complained about traffic. It was one of those things about her that the staff always noticed. You could be stuck on the M25 for an hour and a half, and she'd just sit there, looking out the window, thinking about whatever Anne thinks about. Collins navigated it with the patience of a man who'd been doing this for over a decade. At one point, somewhere around junction 12, Anne's phone buzzed. A text from William. Just 2 words. Be careful. She didn't reply. She put the phone back in her bag. By the time they reached the airport perimeter, it was nearly 8:30. Anne's protection officer, a capable, quiet woman named Davis, who had served with Anne for 6 years and who understood, in the way all good protection officers do, that her job was to be invisible until she wasn't, had called ahead. The airport's VIP liaison was told only that a senior member of the royal family was arriving for a private engagement. No names were given. No further details were requested or provided. They pulled into the private entrance on the south side of Terminal 5. Anne got out, walked through the glass doors, and went inside. Heathrow at night is a different place. Most of the shops are shut. The food courts are empty. The lighting feels harsher when there's no crowd to soften it. Everything echoes more. Footsteps, luggage wheels, the occasional announcement that nobody's listening to. Anne walked through it all without slowing down. Her shoes clicked on the polished tile in a steady, purposeful rhythm. Davies was 3 steps behind. A young airport security officer, mid-20s, sharp uniform, eyes that went wide with recognition, saw Anne coming and reached for his radio. He spoke into it quietly, and within minutes, the area near Gate 22, where Harry's 11:45 flight to Los Angeles was scheduled to depart, had been discreetly cleared of unnecessary personnel. Anne reached the gate area at 9:15. She entered the private lounge, small grey leather chairs, a jug of water nobody had touched. Through the window she could see the runway, planes taxiing in the dark, red lights blinking. She sat down, didn't order anything, didn't take out her phone, just waited. Harry arrived at 10:22. She heard him before she saw him. The sound of his entourage, 2 protection officers and a personal assistant, moving through the corridor with the particular energy of people who are used to being in a hurry. Then the rolling of a suitcase on tile. Then his voice, on the phone, laughing. Something about a meeting. Something about next week. Normal conversation. Like nothing in the world was wrong. Anne stood up. She straightened her coat, picked up her briefcase, walked out of the lounge and into the corridor. Harry was 40 feet away, coming toward the gate, phone pressed to his ear, eyes on the departure board above. His assistant, a young woman in a dark jacket, noticed Anne first. She touched Harry's elbow. He looked up. Anne walked toward him, steady, no rush. Harry, he lowered the phone. His smile was gone. Anne? What are you doing here? Funny, I was going to ask you the same thing. She stopped 5 feet from him, close enough to see his eyes, far enough to make him come to her. He didn't. Although I already know the answer. You're here for 20 hours. A charity photo in the morning, big smile, handshakes, then back on the plane to California. Back to the deal. What deal? Anne tilted her head, just slightly. £80 million, Harry. That deal. He went white, completely white. Right there in the middle of Terminal 5. I don't know what you've heard. I haven't heard anything. I've read everything. She opened her briefcase, pulled out a single folded sheet of paper. Page 31. She unfolded it slowly, held it up so he could see it. His eyes went to the page. She watched them move. She watched them stop. You want to tell me why your niece's birthday party is on a Netflix production schedule? Harry's security looked at each other. His assistant had already retreated down the corridor. The young security officer near the gate turned his back, pretending to check something on his radio. Everyone within earshot understood that this was not a conversation they were meant to hear. Anne, you don't have the full picture. I have 47 pages. I have your signature on every one of them. I have production clauses, content schedules, and a number so large it would take a nurse 26 centuries to earn it. I have the full picture, Harry. I've had it for 3 days. And I drove 2 hours in the rain to show it to you. It's not what you think. Then correct me. Stand there and correct me. Her voice didn't rise. It dropped, and somehow that was 100 times worse. Tell me how a contract that includes the recreation of private family conversations, things said behind closed doors, things said at Christmas, things said at funerals, is something other than what it looks like. Tell me how the use of your nieces' and nephews' names in a production budget is anything other than selling children's privacy for profit. Tell me how handing over detailed accounts of your mother's private words to her sons, the last words, Harry, the ones she said when no one else was listening. Tell me how that's anything other than betrayal. The airport hummed around them. Somewhere, a boarding announcement chimed for a flight to Dubai. The cleaning cart made its slow circuit at the far end of the corridor, and Harry stood there, hands in his pockets now, the way he used to stand as a boy outside his father's study at Highgrove, waiting to be told what he'd done wrong. I needed to tell my story, he said, quieter now. Our story. Megan and I don't. Anne put her hand up, just like that. One word, one hand, and Harry stopped mid-sentence. Don't you dare put this on your wife. She didn't grow up in this family. She didn't sit at our table at Christmas. She didn't walk behind your mother's coffin. She didn't stand in that chapel and promise to serve. You did. You are a Windsor. You are a prince. And you made this choice with your own hand and your own name. So don't you dare deflect. I wasn't deflecting. I was explaining. There is nothing to explain, Harry. Nothing that makes £80 million acceptable. Anne took one step closer. Do you want to know something? When that contract landed on my desk, I read every single page. And I kept thinking, surely there's a line. Surely there's a page where he drew a line and said, no, not that. That's too far. But there wasn't one. Not one page where you held anything back. You gave them everything. Harry's jaw worked. He was trying to find the comeback, the line that would make this make sense. You could see him searching for it. The media destroyed us, Anne. They destroyed Meghan. They destroyed... The media is awful. I agree. I've dealt with them for 50 years. They called me every name you can think of. But I didn't burn my family's house down because the neighbours were rude. She paused. Do you know what I have earned in 50 years of service? Do you have any idea? I have never sold an interview. I have never written a memoir. I have never sat on a sofa in front of cameras and told strangers what your grandfather said to me at dinner or what your mother told me on the worst night of her life. Because those things are not mine to sell. They belong to the family. They belong to the people who said them. And you treated them like stock you were clearing out of a warehouse. Harry couldn't look at her. He kept shifting his weight, turning his head, doing that thing people do when they know they're losing an argument but won't admit it. You want to know what hurts the most? Anne said, and something in her voice shifted. Not softer, but heavier, as if the words cost her something to say. It's not the money. It's not the contract. It's not even the children, although God knows that's bad enough. It's Diana. Harry flinched, physically flinched. He actually took half a step back, and for a second, he looked like a kid who'd just been caught doing something he knew was wrong. Your mother trusted you with things she didn't share with anyone else on this earth. Last conversations, private moments, the words she said to you and your brother when the doors were closed and the cameras were off, and she was just a mother talking to her sons. Those were the most valuable things you possessed, and I don't mean in pounds. I mean in something money can't touch. Anne paused. A plane roared down the runway outside the window, and the glass shuddered, and the sound swallowed everything for 3 seconds, before fading into a deep, fading hum. And you gave them away. You typed them up, or you sat in a room and dictated them into a microphone, and you handed them to people whose only interest in your mother is how many viewers her name brings in. She would have understood, Harry said. His voice broke on the last word. No, Anne shook her head. Once. Firm. Final. She would have burned that contract. She would have torn it to pieces and dropped the pieces in the fire and told you that some things are sacred. And deep down, in the part of you that still remembers who you were before the money and the cameras and the California sunshine, you know that. The silence that followed lasted maybe 5 seconds. Harry stood there with his suitcase beside him, phone still in his hand, and something happened to his face. His eyes got wet. He wasn't crying. He would never cry in front of Anne. Not here. But he was close. Closer than he'd been in a long time. Harry turned his head, rubbed his jaw with one hand, tried to pull himself together. You don't understand what it was like, he said quietly. Being pushed aside, being ignored, feeling like you don't matter to the people who are supposed to. I understand perfectly. Anne didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. I have been overlooked, underfunded, and ignored by the British press for 50 years. I watched my mother give the spotlight to Charles, because that was his role. I watched Diana take everything that was left. I watched the tabloids call me boring, call me cold, call me the one nobody wants to read about. I once saw a headline that said I was the least popular royal in the family. Least popular. Like it's a competition. Like any of this is supposed to be about popularity. She stopped herself, took a breath, then kept going. Quieter now. And do you know what I did, Harry? I showed up every single morning. I put on my coat, I got in the car, and I went to work. I visited hospitals, and I sat with dying people, and I opened buildings, and I rode horses, and I represented this country in places you've never even heard of. Because that is what duty means. It means showing up when nobody's watching, when nobody cares, when you could sell the whole thing for £80 million and disappear to California. She paused. I stayed. You left. And then you sold the keys on your way out. Harry had no answer. There wasn't one. Every defense he'd built, the talking points, the interview answers, the carefully rehearsed explanations about truth-telling and mental health and finding his voice, they all fell apart in front of a woman who had simply done the work without needing anyone to clap. His lips parted, his chest rose. For one fraction of a second, something passed across his face, something raw and young and frightened. The boy who stood at his mother's funeral and didn't know how to carry the weight. He almost said it, whatever it was, an apology, an admission, a single honest word. Then it passed. The wall came back. His jaw tightened, his shoulders squared. He pulled his suitcase handle up with a click. I should go, he said. "My flight's boarding." Anne looked at him. The anger was gone now. What was left was something worse. The look you give someone when you've realized there's nothing more you can do for them. "Yes," she said, "you should." He turned. He walked toward the gate. His footsteps echoed on the polished floor, steady, measured, the walk of a man who knew he was being watched and refused to show what he was feeling. His security fell into step behind him. The gate agent checked his boarding pass without meeting his eyes. The jet bridge door opened, and the sound of aircraft engines filled the corridor, deep, mechanical, alive, before the door closed again and swallowed everything back into silence. Anne stood there, perfectly still. The departure board flickered. Flight to Los Angeles, on time. Davies appeared at her shoulder, said nothing, because there was nothing to say. Anne turned and walked back down the corridor, past the closed shops, past the empty gate, past the young security officer who stood a little straighter as she passed. Her shoes clicked on the tile. The cleaning cart had moved on. A coffee shop sign flickered once, then went dark. Collins was waiting at the car. He opened the rear door without a word. Anne got in. The engine started. They pulled out of the terminal, through the airport's maze of roundabouts and access roads, and onto the motorway. She didn't speak for 20 minutes. The rain had stopped, but the roads were still wet. Collins drove. He knew when to be quiet. "Radio 4, Anne said eventually. He turned it on. A late-night discussion program. Something about agricultural subsidies in the post-Brexit landscape. Ordinary. Familiar. The kind of thing that has nothing to do with Netflix or £80 million or a nephew who couldn't look his aunt in the eye. The countryside was dark outside the window. Anne watched it go by. Maybe she was thinking about Diana. There'd been a conversation between them once, years and years ago, when Diana had said something about her boys. Anne never told anyone what it was. Not her children, not her husband, nobody. And she never would. That's just who Anne is. Back at Kensington Palace, the lights were still on in one room. William sat in the sitting room with his phone on the table in front of him. Kate had gone upstairs. The children had school in the morning, and someone had to be the steady one, the parent who laid out the uniforms and packed the lunchboxes, and whispered good night, even when the world outside felt like it was coming apart at the seams. William waited. When his phone rang at midnight, he picked it up before the first ring ended. "It's done," Anne said. She sounded tired. "And?" He boarded the flight. "Did he say anything?" "He said he had no choice." A pause. "He said Diana would have understood." William didn't say anything for so long that Anne thought maybe the call had cut out. But then she heard him exhale. Hard. The kind of breath you let out when you're trying not to say something you'll regret. "He's wrong," William said finally. "I know. What do we do now? What we've always done. We show up, we do the work, we protect the children, and we carry on." She hung up. The car turned off the main road and onto the dark country lane that winds toward Gatcombe. Hedgerows appeared in the headlights, then disappeared. The gravel drive crunched. The house materialized out of the darkness, solid and old and patient, with one light on in the hall, the one Anne always left burning because the dogs didn't like the dark. Collins opened the door. Anne stepped out. The cold hit her face, and she was glad of it. Jem was at the front door, tail going, completely oblivious to what had just happened, and not caring about anything except getting her ears scratched. Anne bent down, rubbed the dog's head. "Good girl," she said quietly. "At least someone in this family knows how to behave." She went inside, locked the door, put the kettle on, made a cup of tea, and this time, for the first time in 3 days, she actually drank it while it was still hot. She sat in the kitchen, not the study, just sat there with her tea and her dog, and the sound of the house settling around her, the way old houses do at night. After a while, she went to the study, moved the contract folder to a drawer, and picked up the briefing papers for the naval base visit she'd rescheduled. She read for about 20 minutes, then stopped, stared at the wall, then picked up the pen again and kept going, because that's what Princess Anne does. That's what she has always done. While others gave interviews, she gave service. While others wrote memoirs and signed deals and filmed documentaries about their suffering, Anne put on her coat and went to work. No cameras, no fanfare, no £80 million, just the quiet, stubborn, unshakable belief that you show up, you do your duty, and you don't sell your family's soul on the way out the door. The morning after, the news reported that Prince Harry had visited London briefly for a charitable engagement before returning to his home in Montecito. There was a photograph of him at the event, smiling, shaking hands, looking for all the world like a man without a care. The press said nothing about Heathrow. The public knew nothing about Terminal 5, or the corridor, or the folded page, or the words that hung in the air at 10:30 at night. But inside the palace, something had changed. Not in any way the newspapers would ever report, but people inside those walls could feel it. Something had been said that couldn't be unsaid, and everyone was quietly figuring out what that meant. Charles was told on Friday morning. His private secretary delivered the information in the study at Clarence House, standing by the fireplace with his hands clasped behind his back, choosing his words carefully. Charles didn't react immediately. He sat in the leather armchair by the window, the one his mother had given him years ago, and he looked at his hands. For a long time. The private secretary waited. The clock ticked. A gardener moved past the window outside, carrying a rake, unaware that anything inside had changed. "She went alone," Charles said finally. "Yes, Your Majesty. To the airport." "Yes, sir. Terminal 5, Thursday evening." Charles nodded, slowly. He didn't look up. "She always was the bravest of us," he said quietly. He wasn't trying to make a grand statement, it just came out. But the private secretary heard it, and he never forgot it. The days that followed were tense inside the palace. Nobody was shouting. That's not how the Windsors work. But there was a heaviness. Phone calls between Buckingham Palace, Kensington and Gatcombe. Lawyers getting involved. Communications people in closed-door meetings. Everyone asking the same thing. What now? Anne's answer was simple. Nothing public. Nothing dramatic. No statements, no press conferences, no carefully worded letters released through official channels. What she had said to Harry, she had said to his face. That was enough. "If he wants to respond," she told William on the phone the following Saturday, "he knows where to find me. I'll be at Gatcombe, or Bristol, or wherever the schedule says I need to be. That's the difference between us. I'll be where duty puts me." The Netflix deal, as deals do, continued, but in the weeks that followed, something changed. The most invasive planned content, the recreations of private family conversations, the children's material, the deepest personal revelations, was quietly restructured, scaled back, softened. Not removed entirely, and not acknowledged publicly, but pulled back from the edge, as if someone in the production chain had received a very clear message about where the line was. Sources close to the production team later said that certain episodes were revised for sensitivity. That's corporate language. What it really meant was that someone had drawn a line and dared anyone to cross it. Whether that was because of Anne's words at Heathrow, or because of legal pressure, or because Harry himself lay awake on a California night, staring at the ceiling while the Pacific wind rattled the windows of his Montecito mansion, and heard his aunt's voice and knew, in that terrible, honest place where no amount of money can buy you peace, that she was right. No one can say for certain. But the timing was impossible to ignore. Somewhere over the Atlantic, 35,000 feet above the dark ocean, Harry sat in a first-class cabin, with the window shade pulled down and the overhead light switched off. The cabin was quiet, except for the low roar of the engines, that constant, muffled thunder that becomes a kind of silence after a while. The flight attendant had offered him champagne, a meal, a blanket. He'd declined everything. He sat with his hands in his lap, his eyes open, staring at the seatback in front of him without seeing it. He kept replaying it. Not the whole thing, just pieces. Anne's face when she held up page 31. The way she said, £80 million. 3 separate words, and every one of them landed. The way she mentioned Diana. That was the part he couldn't get past. Anne hadn't shouted, hadn't cried. She'd just said it, plain and calm. Your mother would have burned that contract. And the worst part was that she was right. He knew his mother. He knew her better than anyone alive except William. And he knew that Diana would have been horrified. Horrified. That's the word. Diana would have been horrified. He thought about calling Megan. His phone was in his pocket. He could turn it on and tell her everything. But what would he say? That his 74-year-old aunt had shown up at an airport and taken apart every excuse he'd ever made in about 10 minutes flat. He didn't call. He sat in the dark and he thought about Anne, going back to work tomorrow like nothing happened. Not telling anyone. Not writing about it. Not selling it. Just doing what she's always done. And then he thought about himself, flying home to a house paid for with his family's secrets, and he couldn't make those two things sit right next to each other in his head. They just didn't fit. When the plane landed in Los Angeles 11 hours later, the sun was out. Of course it was. It's always sunny in California. Harry's car was waiting on the tarmac. The driver opened the door. Harry got in. A different world from that cold corridor at Heathrow. He rode home without saying a word. Through traffic, past the palm trees, through the gates. The house looked the same. The garden, the kids playing out back. Nothing had changed. Except it had. Something was sitting in his chest now that hadn't been there before. And he couldn't name it, and he couldn't get rid of it. Anne's voice. That's what it was. Calm and certain and absolutely uninterested in his excuses. And Anne? She went back to work. The following Monday, she visited the Veterans Care Home in Bristol that she'd postponed. She arrived on time, wearing a sensible coat and that same scarf she'd had for decades. She spent 3 hours there, an hour longer than scheduled, sitting with 90-year-old men who had served their country in wars most people have forgotten, listening to their stories, holding their hands, laughing at their jokes. One of them, a former Royal Marine named Arthur, told her about his wife, who had passed away 6 months earlier after 58 years of marriage. Anne held his hand while he talked. She didn't check her phone. She didn't look at her watch. She just listened, the way she always did, because that was the job, and the job mattered. She didn't mention Harry. She didn't mention Netflix. She didn't mention £80 million, or 47 pages, or a cold corridor at Heathrow where she had told her nephew the truth and watched him walk away without answering. When a reporter outside the care home asked her about rumours of a private confrontation with Prince Harry, Anne stopped walking, just for a moment. She turned and looked at the reporter with those sharp, steady, unyielding eyes. The same eyes that had stared down Harry at gate 22. The same eyes that had looked at 47 pages of betrayal without blinking. I had a conversation with a member of my family, she said evenly. I have conversations with members of my family regularly. That's what families do. Then she got in her car and left. Collins drove. The radio played. The English countryside rolled past the windows, green and grey and patient, the same as it has always been. Some things aren't for sale. Not for £80 million. Not for 800 million. Not for anything in this world. And some people, the ones who understand that, who have understood it their whole lives, who get up every morning and do the work and never once ask for a round of applause. Some people will drive 2 hours in the rain just to make sure you hear it, even if you don't want to, even if you walk away, even if you board a plane and fly 6,000 miles and try to pretend the words didn't land exactly where they were aimed. They did, and they always will, because Anne doesn't miss. So here's the question I want to leave you with. And tell me in the comments below. Do you think Anne was right to confront Harry face to face at Heathrow? Or should she have kept it behind palace doors? I want to hear what you think.